Yahoo! It's Art Chat. Right, here we go. Welcome to the very first Art Chat. I'm Lynn Chapman, and this is John Burks, who happens to be my husband. And we're both artists, and we thought it would be nice to talk to you a little bit about what we do and have a chat about some of the issues that we're coming up against and just share things. And yeah, thought it'd be quite interesting, but particularly interesting because each of us does various different things. So, John, do you want to just quickly tell people the kinds of things that you do?
Well, I've got three strings to my bow. I do ceramic work, usually sculptures. I also do printmaking, and again, usually, certainly in recent times, that's been collagraph printmaking, which, if anyone's not really sure what that's about, I think at a later date we could talk about that. And very recently, I've been doing acrylic paintings on canvas, which is a totally new venture for me and is proving enjoyable but challenging, should we say.
Yeah, and the things that I do, I've been an illustrator all my life, but just over the last, say, 5 or 6 years, I've given that up completely, and I'm now a fine artist. And I have different strings to my bow as well. So I create fine art textiles, which are abstract, hand stitched. It's all about layering organzas and mark making. So I do that, but that has evolved into a more three-dimensional kind of textiles, which basically has become sculpture. It does have a textile element, and there's often thread in them, but they use lots of different materials. Often waste plastics actually has been something that I've been doing a lot in recent times. And they've been quite sort of weird and wonderful and sometimes quite big, which has proved quite challenging because what on earth do you do with them afterwards? So I did that, but I've also started to paint just over the last year really. And I've always painted from life, but I've started now to paint in acrylics in the studio, abstract painting, which is again very new for me too. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of interesting things to kind of talk about because we're both learning, aren't we? And so we thought it'd be quite interesting to share that with you. So, but let's get sort of down to detail, really, more specifically. What have you been doing this week, John?
This week I've been doing some ceramic work. I'm working on a project that has component parts to it. Over the past year, I've been creating basically balls, upon expression, and my plan is that they work as individual pieces of art, but ultimately I want to create enough of them that they then can be put together to create well, how would you describe it? An installation, perhaps.
Yeah.
How I will do that and what it will finally look like, I really don't know. I've just got this idea of something that has multiple component parts to it, where each of those component parts is itself a work of art. Then you get an extra piece of artwork by bringing them all together. So that's my very loose thinking. And the piece that I've been working on today, as I say, are balls, and they are created in one of the simplest forms of ceramics that you can possibly imagine. So I take 2 pieces of clay, roughly sort of like fist sized, maybe a little bigger, maybe a little smaller, depending on the ultimate size I'm trying to create. And then from each ball, I create a very, very crude bowl shape. So it's very much a Fred Flintstone cereal bowl that I create by just pushing it into the lump of clay, spreading it out, so it creates a very crude bowl. Same with the other one. Then I wet the rim of each bowl.
Yeah.
And cut it with a knife so we've got a rough surface, then
I see. So
stick
they
them
stick together more.
They stick together. You smooth it over, so then you have got a bubble. There's air trapped inside there, so that then when you start to manipulate this very crude ball of clay, it compresses the air that's inside it, and the air holds it out, stops it from collapsing.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then you can start to slowly beat it into the shape that you want, and keep going and keep going and keep going, and then slowly but surely it starts to dry. Now when it starts to dry, it shrinks. So there you've got a problem, because you've got air inside of it, it's shrinking and the air's got nowhere to go, so it starts to crack.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So at that point you have to put a small hole into it, allow the air to come out, repressurize, and smooth over the hole, and then you can continue and keep going and keep going.
So do you have to do that small hole several times, or does it only happen once?
Possibly. It depends very much on the temperature of the studio that you're working in.
Oh, right, okay.
And how quickly it's drying out.
Uh-huh.
But you may have to do it several times. There's no problems with that. Ultimately, that when you get the shape roughly that you want, it will dry. You then dry it out either just by leaving it with the air temperature, or you help it along with an air dryer, so it reaches a point called leather hard, and at that point it will support its own weight, and you can carve into it and even cut holes into it all the way through, and it won't collapse.
Okay.
You can finish off the shape. Now, so by doing that, you've got something maybe that size, which if it was a solid lump of clay will be extremely heavy and will probably blow up in the kiln.
Why would it blow up?
It blow up because if you've got a large piece of clay like that, there's always a danger that there are minute air bubbles in it, which will expand and blow it up.
Okay.
Or the main issue is that it would take weeks and weeks and weeks to be completely 100% dry.
Uh-huh.
Because even if it's got the slightest bit of dampness somewhere in the centre, that again, as it goes into the kiln, will boil off, and one almighty explosion,
Right.
wrecking everything else that's in the kiln.
Right.
That makes you extremely difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So, just to give, for those of us who are from the UK, this is one I made earlier. Right, referring to an old children's programme. Okay, so this is one that I've made exactly as I've just explained to you. So I then apply a lot of texture to it, smooth off certain areas, create lots of holes in there so that you can actually see right through it. And
hold it still for a bit so people can see the textures.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
So as I was explaining that, there we have an individual object, which you either like it or you don't. But my aim is to create loads of these so that they then can be put together to create a larger object. So there's another one that I made. See, slightly different pattern. It's very similar, different size.
The one that you're making at the moment,
Yes.
Is it bigger or is it smaller?
It's actually somewhere in between those two sizes.
Right.
Actually, it's two that I'm working on at the moment.
And are they kind of carved in a similar way?
No,
or?
the patterns are very different.
Okay.
On the two that I'm making at the moment. The only similarity is that they are still pierced.
Yeah.
So that the theme of holes will go through all of those.
Excellent.
So as you can see, by making them hollow, you have the advantage of being able to see through it, which is quite a nice thing. You could even put lights in there, but you can actually pick them up. In this one in particular, if that was solid clay, it would be very difficult to hold that there.
Yes,
there.
of course, it weighed a ton.
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yes, so that's keeping me busy.
Lovely. So I've been doing something completely different this week, but also sculptural. So I suppose in that way it's the same. I've had I had a really interesting email from somebody called Ron Shelton, who's an artist working in Cleveland, America, and he works with a lot of waste plastics, the same as I do, and he'd noticed some of my work, and so he's invited me to take part in a project. And it's really bonkers, but it's brilliant. Okay, so this project, he started off doing them himself. He makes what he's calling art hats, which are just like cones made out of wire, structure about so big, just as a support. And then he attaches different kinds of waste plastic, so the sort of thing that would otherwise end up in landfill or in the sea. And so it's a statement basically, as well as a beautiful object. So he made several of these, and they were looking really fun. So he started to run workshops with local kids, and also he's teamed up with an art gallery, and they've been doing community workshops as well. And people just come in and make these brilliant things. But they're all the same idea. They're all these art hats. So it was going so well that he thought he'd start putting work together for an exhibition. And so he's going to include a lot of the work that the kids and the community have done, but he also invited artists from around the world to contribute. So I was really flattered that he asked me, and so we've been asked to make an art hat. So that's what I've been doing, and I've created this this thing. So it is a hat, and it does fit me. Sort of. It's a bit wobbly, but isn't it bonkers? I just love it, and it's all made with waste plastic. So I don't know how well you can see it, and sort of hold it up for you. The green at the base it's vegetable sacks, the kind of plastic vegetable sacks that you might get potatoes or something in, and that's been wound around the cone to hide the wire. And then the rest of it is made from plastic carrier bags. And it's interesting how wonderfully colourful it looks when you put them all together. They're just regular carrier bags. But what I do is I take strips, I cut strips, and I twist them. And then you get these sort of threads that you're going to make the coils out of. And then to keep them in place, I cut thinner strips in a different colour. What I use is mainly the handles, on the more substantial bags where they have the separate plastic handles. That's really strong plastic, and you can cut it really quite thin. So I create these longer strips. And what happens if you twist the first bit of plastic in one direction, and then you wrap the thinner strips around it in a different direction, it doesn't all untwist. So then you've got this kind of long, really weird, colourful thread, effectively. And then it's just basket weaving technique, really, just coiling it round and using embroidery thread in different colours to hold it all together. So I didn't know what I was going to do, really. I started off thinking, I'll make these, I'll try the kind of coiling technique. And I just made loads of the coils, and then sort of kind of worked out what to do from there. And it's been quite interesting because my work is always created with, your work's a bit planned, isn't it? You start off with a plan.
Yes, I always have a starting point.
Yeah, especially ceramics is very planned, but certainly the painting you do is planned. Whereas my work is never planned. I like the kind of exploration of not knowing what's going to happen. So I find if I plan something too much, by the time I get to do it, I actually have lost interest in it because I know where it's going. So I work quite intuitively. So that's how I create my plastic stuff. It's all sort of like see what happens as you go along. But sort of talking about, problems, that does create issues sometimes, because I got the cone and then I got these created, and I realised as I got higher up that it's really tricky to attach them because you can't actually get to them. You know, when you're sewing something, they're attached by stitching. When you're sewing something, you need to be able to get kind of like both hands in so that you can cast on and cast off, and passing the needle in and out while you're holding this in place, so you've only got one hand, is impossible. So it took quite a lot of doing. And
so wouldn't it have been possible as an alternative to have created the cone flat, apply these in a far more accessible way,
yes, working
then
on the flat,
coil it back, round it back to its cone shape, and then fix it back together? Was that something that you didn't think of, or something that you did think of but ruled out for practical reasons?
Neither of those things. I have made conical shapes in the past and do know the problems, so should have actually thought about that. But yeah, it's mainly just, it's because this whole planning thing, if I'd have done it flat, I would have had to have really planned out where they went, in order that when you then put it together again, you don't have a really obvious sort of blank area. And I just didn't want to do that. But also the structural integrity of this on the wire cone makes it much more easy to work. I suppose I could have, I could have put that flat and sewn it onto it, but it hasn't got any body to it. This is so flimsy, this green stuff, that if I'd have tried to stitch these to the green stuff without the wire, I think it would have been a nightmare for different reasons. Yeah. So, yeah. But I managed it. A certain amount of swearing and, just a persistence, stubborn persistence. But, the other thing that's made it kind of more possible to be supported is I discovered a little while ago this magical substance called Pavapol. And it's like spelt like it sounds, Pavapol, and it's comes in a big tub, and it's a bit like a really thick gloopy kind of PVA glue, and you paint it on stuff and it makes it go really hard. So where I couldn't cast off the threads when I was in the very top, but there was just no way of actually making a knot without actually having it on the surface, what I did was use the Pavapol to cement the little bits. Let me show you. See how there's these little bits of thread here. When it was the last thread, I basically took the Pavapol and a paintbrush inside and painted it in place so that it set solid, and then I could cut the cotton so that it wouldn't all unravel. And I used the same thing for the top. This green stuff, I've used it in my flat textiles work before because it's great texture, but it's a nightmare. It just unravels constantly. So the top of it, I loved all this riggedy-raggedy stuff, but I knew that it would just fall to bits really quickly. So I painted the Pavapol over it, and now it's stiff enough that it stays in place. And it goes clear. So it's brilliant. And you can do it with PVA. I have done it with PVA before, but this is better because once it's done, it's 100% waterproof, everything proof. Whereas PVA, if you wet it again, it goes all milky.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, so it's great stuff. So this is my bonkers art hat, and I finished.
Just point out that I think this is a really good example of where you have the dilemma of structural integrity. You're actually trying to create something that's three-dimensional that as a result needs to in effect be engineered.
Yes.
With all the practical issues that are involved. But it's a work of art, so you don't want those structural constraints, as you were saying with the difficulties that you're having. You don't want that to lead your art.
No.
So it's
a balance. You're right. Yeah, it is. Yeah, getting those two things. So because if it's not, I've made earlier work that similar sorts of shapes, but much, much smaller out of textiles, and they don't stand up.
Yes.
And I discovered that after having made the flipping things. They were designed to stand up and they didn't have enough structural integrity. So it was a learning process. But yeah, that is a balance. But what was interesting was I finished this and I was so excited by how it looked that the first thing I did was make another wire comb so as I could immediately start a new one. So the other thing I've been doing this week is starting the new hat, and it's still carrier bags. So I've got a big stash of carrier bags, but I'm using them in a really different way because this is quite solid, whereas the new one is, I've got all these kind of wires that twist around. It's all about space, and it's much more linear, so you can see right through it. So it's going to be very different, but made from the same materials. So interesting times.
Yeah, it's really beautiful, and it's great that we won't need to buy a Christmas tree this year.
It does look very Christmassy. Lots of people when I posted it said how Christmassy it looked, and it's so interesting. Yeah, it's the green, I think, that's obviously the conical shape. But if it wasn't green, I don't think it would do that. But yeah, that's completely, by accident.
That'll save us a few pounds. Good.
So, the other thing we wanted to talk about was more about problems, because I think one of the things that's interesting is sharing some of the challenges that you have when you're an artist. And I'm sure that the problems we're having will be problems that you guys have had out there if you've tried to create artwork. So so I thought let's just talk a bit more about some of the problems that you've been having this week, John. Talk to us a bit about your painting, because I know that's been the biggest biggest challenge.
Even though over the years I've had involvement with art in all sorts of different ways, I'm not going to the boring details about that, but not at this point anyway. So I've never actually painted before. As I've said, I've done sculpture, I've done print work, worked a lot with resistant materials, and predominantly three-dimensional. But it's the first time I've actually tried painting, and so far I've completed 4 acrylic paintings. I started at the beginning of the lockdown, around March time, the COVID lockdown, so I had plenty of time to do it, and I found it very enjoyable, but challenging. And my most recent finished painting, is this one.
Can we get it so that you can see the hook there?
Yeah, there we go. Yay. Yeah, there we go. So as you can see, it's on canvas. It's acrylic paints. My starting point was trees, which is a thing I particularly love. Where we live in Sheffield, we're surrounded by trees all the time. And my aim was to try to create something that was reminiscent of trees in a landscape, but not totally realistic. So halfway house between total abstraction and being realistic, which I think hopefully I've achieved with this. There's a lot of texture to it.
Yeah, I love the texture. It's really interesting. Let's hold it up a bit closer, because I'm not sure whether people will be able to see the texture. So there's sort of different kinds of textures. Yeah, I love this bit here.
Yes.
It's really very. So do you want to tell people how you've created this texture? Because it's not. It's very. Because that looks like it would be ridgy and 3-dimensional, but it's really smooth. It's silky smooth.
It's a mixture. I mean, I discovered my technique just really as I went along with this. So it's layers and layers and layers of acrylic paint, different colours. Sometimes applied with a brush, sometimes applied with a palette knife, and then I rub it back using a thing called wet and dry, which is a kind of sandpaper or glass paper that is very fine, often used for rubbing down paint on metals and cars. And you wet the surface and literally just rub it down like you would with sandpaper, and it takes off the top layers of paint very, very gradually, revealing what's underneath
Mm.
and smoothing down the raised areas.
So is it in a way it's quite random. You don't know exactly what you're going to
You
get.
don't know exactly what you're going to get. That's right.
Yeah. Reminds me a bit of the kind of like batik. It's almost like in reverse, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It is a very similar to batik.
Yeah.
And then of course we've got then the flat colours,
So for the
which
contrast.
I mask off, and then certain areas like here that are still very much
Let's
raised.
bring that in.
They're still very much raised texture.
Oh yeah,
areas.
you can feel those. Yeah, they're not as raised as you would think they are, but
No.
there's a little bit of texture to them.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. So that's the same. It's right at the
Yeah.
back, is it? Yeah.
That's it.
Okay.
So I was quite pleased with that one.
Okay. Let's put that down there, I think.
And then, but the one I'm working on at the moment is proving to be far more of a challenge. And I think it's probably because of the subject matter.
Yeah, definitely. I think. Yeah.
This is where it's at the moment. And I must emphasise it is still a long way from
Yeah.
I decided to challenge myself and move away from trees as my inspiration into something that's I'm less comfortable with. And this is very loosely based on an urban landscape, buildings, inspired by the buildings that are in the immediate area again where we live, which are old stone-built Victorian buildings. So when I first started it, it was far too literal, and it's still too literal now. But it's slowly becoming more and more abstracted away from my original, just very rough sketch of just some houses and shops in a street. So I think you can still see that it is an urban landscape.
Yeah, I think you immediately know that.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's the zigzags of the housetops that really give it away.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I still think it needs to move away from that a little bit more. For me, it's still too literal. So I will abstract it a little further. And I think part of the challenge is that point at which to stop doing that. But it certainly needs to develop further. It's far too literal up here for my liking. But
it's getting there,
getting
isn't it?
somewhere.
Yeah.
So I was fairly despondent with it for a while.
Yeah. I saw some of the earlier versions and I heard some of your comments.
Yes. Language not to be repeated.
Yeah.
And it did nearly get thrown out the window once or twice. But I did what I suspect we all should do as artists when we're struggling with something, is resist the temptation to throw it through the window. For one start, it irritates neighbours. Put it to one side, go out and have a coffee or whatever, or even just leave it for a few days or even a few weeks, and come back to it with a fresh eye and a fresh state of mind.
Yeah.
And then keep going, which is what I did really with this one. And I now feel as if we're starting to get somewhere with it.
Yeah.
But a long way to go.
Yeah.
I really think that patience is clearly probably the primary skill.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right.
I did used to be a teacher, so patience there is a primary skill.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. Yeah. Okay, so what else has been happening for me? Well,
You've been painting too.
I have been painting. I've been painting. Well, I haven't been painting this week. I've been painting recently. But we went on holiday, which kind of stopped me, and then I've been making my art hat. So actually, I've probably not painted for about 3 weeks. But something else has come along, which I'm doing, which I'm trying to weave in and out of doing the art hats, which is quite interesting. Which is I've enrolled in an online course. I've been doing wrestling, like John, really wrestling with abstract painting for about a year, and particularly since the lockdown started in March, because I had a bit more time. My income, since I gave up book illustration, I've been earning my living working with academics, basically university researchers, and I go out and I do very literal paintings and drawings, just recording research interviews usually. So I'm just like a fly on the wall, really. But that's completely stopped since March because it involves too much contact. So I've had a lot more time on my hands. So I've been wrestling with abstraction because even though I've painted all my life, painted and drawn from life, I've never managed to pull off abstraction, and I've always wanted to. There's been that kind of thing inside that's been telling me that I wanted to do this for donkey's years, really, and I've never really known where to begin. And anyway, so I decided to tackle it, and it's been going quite well, actually. I've been pretty productive because because I'm used to self-motivation, because I've been an artist all my life, and if you don't have that, you don't get anywhere. So I'm used to kind of forcing myself to go in to the studio and get on with it, which is, you know, the main thing, isn't it? If you don't start, nothing's going to happen. So I go in and I wrestle with it, and so I've managed to produce quite a lot of work. And I brought one here to show you, so that you've got some idea what I do. So this is an example of one of mine. So again, it's abstract, but my abstract work is not based on anything. It's just intuitive. It's just about make a mark, then make another mark, and then respond to what you get. So it goes through lots of stages. It usually looks really exciting immediately because I just roll over it and throw things and scribble, and so you get this quite energetic, exciting thing to start with, but it's clearly not a finished painting. So then you have to work over the top, and it usually gets really awful for a while. And then you get really despondent because you've got to paint over all the good stuff, and then it goes in and out of being good and bad, and you just have to stick with it, really. But that's the way I work, and so providing I don't give up, eventually I get something that I like. So this is an example of one that I'm pretty keen on. I think this one is probably finished. Yeah, let's just get it up closer again, because there's quite a lot of texture in that. It looks a bit boring when you just see it from a distance. So there's quite a lot of, I think what's important is to have a picture that works from a distance, is exciting enough to make you want to look closer. But when you look closer, you see a lot of other things. There's a lot more to keep you looking. So that's kind of the way I decide whether a painting is finished is basically, does it work from a distance as well as close up? So anyway, I've been doing this, but it's a struggle. When it gets nearly finished, you kind of need to be better at making decisions, proper decisions, rather than just keep going at it until you get there by accident. And I'm just not very good at that, because I've not got a fine art training, and my degree's in printed textiles. So I've enrolled in this course, and it's somebody called Jenny Nelson, whose paintings I really like. So look her up, she's great. But she's doing a course on abstract painting, and it's over 6 weeks, and I've just started it. And so this week we've started with charcoal, and it's been great fun, actually. I made so much mess. So basically big sheets of paper, big chunky charcoal, charcoal pencils, all sorts of different kind of charcoal, might make rubbers to rub into it, and just make loads of mess. And then finding, with a viewfinder, compositions within that work quite well, and cut them out and stick them on the wall. And then trying to make sort of more clear decisions about those by cutting out bits of collage from the rest of the sheet and sticking on. If you think, that needs a bit more black there, try and stick a bit on until you think it's as good as it can get. So it's a combination of this kind of random way that I normally work, but also actually, you know, looking and making decisions. So I think that's been really interesting for me, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So I'm really looking forward to the rest of the course. And I think what's really good about it is, you know what it's like with online stuff, and at the moment, you know, we're all a bit zoomed out, and you know, I'm sort of like, yeah, about online, particularly art. You kind of need a bit more interaction. So what Jenny's done, which I think is really clever, is she's actually created a real classroom. So she delivers the class for real. She's got 4 students and they do the exercises that you do. So you get to see not just a finished piece, but you get to see what those students are actually doing as they go along and what she says to them. And then at the end there's a crit, so you get to hear what Jenny sort of says about the work they've done. So it's a much richer experience than it would be if she just set us exercises to do. So I think it feels as close as you're going to get to a real classroom situation if you're going to be online. So I'm thinking it's working really well, and I'm kind of excited to carry on. So it's just about kind of deciding what I do each day. It's a wonderful way to live, isn't it? Not having to decide to do something else that you don't want to do for a living. Deciding whether today is a Jenny Nelson day or an art hack day. That's my biggest challenge.
Well, I've seen some of the work you've done. So it's looking really interesting and very dynamic. Some beautiful compositions, but the main issue for me is, are you ever going to clear the mess up?
There is a lot of mess. Yeah.
Tremendous amount of mess.
Charcoal. That's what's great about charcoal, is partly is the mess. But yeah, I am very lucky that I have the attic in this house. We're in our house at the moment, and the attic is my studio space. So it's a discreet space where I can make mess and walk away, which is fantastic. So I have this kind of area at the moment on one side of the studio that looks a little bit like an explosion in a charcoal factory.
It does.
So I think I don't think we're using charcoal for the second lesson, so I kind of should clear it up now, I reckon. Yeah. So is there anything else you want to talk about, John, before we say goodbye to people?
I don't think so. Not for today. I think we've covered a few things, and plenty more to talk about in the future.
Yeah. So if you've enjoyed this, do hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on the next one we do. We're going to try and do them, you know, reasonably regularly. And leave comments. Well, it will be interesting to see what you think about the work or the way we're doing it. If you've got any feedback, been really welcome, because this is a brand new thing. We've never done it before. We have no idea what we're doing. So it's kind of, we're doing the best we can. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it. It's been fun.
It has indeed.
See you again soon.
See you soon.
Bye.